Now we come to chapter 7, the next prophetical chapter in our study. I don't know. I don't know. You'll have to ask Daniel that. Yeah, evidently more than one line. All right, now we come to the second prophetical chapter in this book. And it's illustrated here by these beasts. The vision of chapter 2, you remember, concerns certain world empires from Daniel's day into all eternity to come. The image was made up of 4 or really 5 different kinds of metal. The image head was made up of gold. That represented the Babylonian Empire. The belly and the arms and the breast of silver symbolize the second kingdom, the kingdom of the Medes and Persians. And the third metal, the brass, the belly and the thighs of brass, symbolize the old Grecian Empire. And the fourth metal of iron symbolized the fourth kingdom, or the old Roman Empire. And the 2 legs on the image symbolizing, of course, the eastern and western divisions of the old Roman Empire. The 2 arms on the breast and arms of silver, that represents the dual kingdom of the Medes and Persians. And then there was another material, clay mixed with iron in the feet, 10 toes, and the feet were part of potter's clay and part of iron. We saw that that represented 10 kingdoms that would be in existence in the days of the second coming of Jesus Christ to the earth. We saw a stone cut out of the mountain without hands, which smote that image upon the feet and break the image in pieces, and all those metals became like the chaff before the summer threshing floor. The wind carried them away, and the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. That was interpreted for us in verses 44 and 45 as the kingdom of the God of heaven being established in the days of the 10 kings represented by the 10 toes. And God's kingdom would be an everlasting kingdom, and all peoples and all nations and all languages should serve him forever. For we read, his kingdom is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom that which shall not pass away. Now we come to these beasts of Daniel 7. Daniel stood upon the sand of the sea, somewhat like John did in the 13th of Revelation. And he sees 4 beasts coming up out of the sea, diverse, one from the other in verse 3. You'll notice in verse 4, the first beast was like a lion. The lion was made to stand upon its feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. It had 2 wings of a fowl, and it passed on. In verse 5, he saw a bear this time, and had 3 ribs in the mouth of it. And it raised itself up on one side. And a voice said to it, arise, devour much flesh. And it passed on. In verse 6, we have another beast, a leopard-like beast, having 4 heads, instead of 1 head as an ordinary leopard had. 4 heads. And it had 4 wings of a fowl. And it passed on, coming out of the Mediterranean Sea. One beast after the other, passing on, following each other. And in verse 7, he saw a nondescript beast, something that there wasn't anything on earth he could compare it to. It was a terrible-looking creature with great iron teeth. And we read it had 10 horns. And in verse 8, he said, I considered the horns. Now, he didn't consider the lion, the bear, the leopard, or the body of the beast, the 4th beast itself, but he focused his vision upon the 10 horns. He never had seen a creature with 10 horns. He had seen them with 1 and 2 and so on, but never 10. So he concentrated upon those 10 horns. Looking upon the head of the beast, he saw growing out of that head 10 horns. And then he saw among the 10 horns, he saw something begin to move among them. And he saw another little horn begin to grow right up among those 10 horns. And in that little horn's growth, from among these 10 and among these 10, he saw a little horn plucking up by the roots 3 of these 10. Then he saw something further in this vision. In verse 9, he saw the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. And 10,000 times 10,000 stood around about him, and judgment was set. He even saw in verse 11, this beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. And concerning the rest of the beasts, he said they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Now in verse 13, he continues the vision by giving us a picture of the coming of the Son of Man. He said, I saw one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days. And they brought him, the Son of Man, before him, the Ancient of Days. And there was given him, the Son of Man, by him, the Ancient of Days, dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, all nations, all languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Thus we have the vision. Now if it was left up to me to interpret this, I'd quit my job right now. I'd turn this pointer over to some of you Bible interpreters, as I am certainly not one. I'm not capable of interpreting such peculiar visions and dreams as we read about in the book of Daniel. I could have worried my head about it all my life up to this point, and would worry about it in all eternity. And I'm afraid I never would come up with the right answer. I guess I could convince a few people that my interpretation was all right. A lot of people do convince people of things that are not all right. And almost any man can get a follower if he can use the tongue just a little bit, or if he has any influence in the least. So I guess I could get a few myself if I'd give all kinds of interpretations of this thing. But I'm not here to interpret and change and twist the Scriptures or go contrary to them in any degree. I'm here, I feel, as my job to get you to see what is written yourself. And I think since you're the official interpreters, that you can do as good a job as anybody else, and maybe a better than what I can do. Of course, you've got Bibles out there, all of you, and I don't have one here. Well, I have one over here, but not here. You're looking at the Bibles, and as quite a few of you ought to be able to check up on any mistake I make. Now, if you can't, why then you need to be deceived if I'm trying to deceive you. If you can't check up on what I'm telling you about, that's the good thing I like about the Bible. You can see for yourself what it says. And any man that comes along and tells you the Bible doesn't mean what it says here, it means something else, you better let that fellow go on about his business and you go on about yours. And you stay by the book. You don't need to change one jot or tittle of this book in order to understand it. When God gives the interpretation, it needs no further interpretation. We don't have to interpret this according to our own opinions any more than we had to interpret chapter 2 according to our own theories. Now then, I want you to look at verse 17 and tell me what these four beasts symbolize. What? Now, is that your interpretation? Now, is that a Baptist interpretation or a Methodist one or a Presbyterian one or a Catholic one? Or what kind of interpretation is that you're giving me? What? No, let's forget about all the different interpretations if there be such. We don't need it. I think just reading it one time, just half reading it would give anybody that information, don't you? Don't you? Is that what it says in all your Bibles? That these four beasts are four what? Kings. Kings. Or kingdoms, literally. For verses 23 and 24 speak of the fourth beast as being the fourth kingdom. So you see, four kingdoms are what's symbolized here. Now then, going back to the first of these, since we know they're not four poodle dogs or four religions or four preachers or four popes or four bishops or four hospitals or something, we know now what they are. Four kingdoms. Let's see if we can't identify them in connection with the same book of Daniel and other sources of help. We have in the image of chapter 2 4 main metals: gold, silver, brass, and iron. These were explained to be 4 kingdoms. Then succeeding the last form of the iron kingdom, there was a 5th kingdom, not numbered, but it was there, for it said, "It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it would be set up in the days of the 10 toes." Now, is there anything wrong in interpreting these 4 beasts just like chapter 7:17 tells us to do it? Think there's anything wrong in doing it that way? In believing literally, then, that these 4 beasts are 4 kingdoms? Think we'd be doing wrong to accept a simple explanation like that? I don't think so. Now then, could these 4 beasts represent the same as the 4 metals on the image? Yes, they could. Now, in whose reign did Daniel see this vision of chapter 7? Look at verse 1. In whose reign did he see this vision? Belshazzar. Belshazzar, king of Babylon. So Daniel is still living during the first of these kingdoms mentioned in the 2nd chapter of Daniel. Still living now during the Babylonian Empire. And he is telling us now that these 4 beasts are 4 kingdoms. Naturally, he living in the first one of the 4. We are to look for 3 more to come after that. Just like we were to look for 3 more to come after Daniel's day when he said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, "Thou art this head of gold. And after you would come another kingdom inferior to you, and another 3rd kingdom of brass, and the 4th kingdom of iron." I think it is just as plain as anything that these 4 beasts then symbolize exactly the same 4 kingdoms. He saw it during the existence of Babylon. Then naturally the 2nd kingdom after that would be the 2nd kingdom after Babylon, as in chapter 2. You'd have to look at it that way. And what kingdom succeeded the Babylonian Empire? Medo-Persian Empire, as we mentioned a few moments ago in Daniel 5. The night of Belshazzar's feast, that night, Darius the Median took the kingdom being 62 years old. So the 2nd beast then represents a 2nd kingdom, and the 3rd a 3rd kingdom, and the 4th a 4th kingdom. That'll be proved further on down here. And now notice the first beast was like a lion. That's a symbol of Babylon. The lion's wing had 2 wings, and the wings were cut off or plucked. This lion was made to stand upon its feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. That represents the debasement of Nebuchadnezzar as pictured in chapter 4. His insanity and his being restored back to a man again, to a normal human being again, and being given back his kingdom. And the bear of chapter 2 symbolizes the Medo-Persian Empire, the same as the breast and arms of silver. And that bear had 3 ribs in the mouth of it. And according to history, the Medes and Persians conquered Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt, represented by those 3 horns, or 3 ribs. And a voice said to it, "Arise, devour much flesh." The Medo-Persian Empire became the biggest of these 4 empires, bigger than Babylon, and was the greatest as far as the territory and peoples. Then there was a 3rd beast in verse 6, like a leopard. It had 4 heads. Now heads in symbolic passages like this, where we find beasts symbolizing kingdoms, heads symbolize kings or kingdoms. Each head symbolizes a kingdom. The horns on beasts, in all these passages in Daniel, as well as in Revelation, symbolize personal rulers of kingdoms, or kings. You remember last Wednesday night, in connection with the beast of Revelation 13 and 17, the explanation of the 7 heads was this. The 7 heads are 7 kingdoms. 5 are fallen. That is, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece are fallen. One is the 6th, or the old Roman Empire at the time John saw the Revelation. The 7th is not yet come. And when he cometh, he is not going to be the last. He's just going to continue for a short space. Then the beast itself is the eighth. So you see there you have the beast again as a symbol of the eighth kingdom. Heads on the one beast symbolize 7 kingdoms that preceded the eighth kingdom. And the horns on the beast of Revelation 17, beginning with verse 12, are explained to be 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet. Just like we have in the vision of chapter 8, the 2 horns on the ram represent the kings of Media and Persia. And the notable horn between the eyes of the he-goat, as you read in the 21st verse of the 8th chapter here. The notable horn is the first king. The 10 horns are 10 kings. The 1 horn is 1 king. The 2 horns are 2 kings. The horns are symbolic of kings, personal kings. Heads on beasts are symbolic of the kingdoms themselves, and so on. So here this leopard with 4 heads, it pictures to us 4 divisions of the old Grecian Empire. 4 kingdoms coming out of that 1 kingdom. And the 4 wings of a fowl symbolize the swiftness of Alexander's conquest. Alexander founded the old Grecian Empire, and with a little Greek army of some 10,000, conquered vast armies of 1,000,000 and more by just swooping down on them so fast like a fowl in a flight, and routed the armies and destroyed them on every hand, became the master of the old Babylonian and Media-Persian worlds.